Welcome, listeners, to a brand new bonus episode of Oh My Word Podcast. And today we have a really, really special guest with us. We have Matt Nagin, who is comedian, actor, director, writer, poet, everything. Is there anything that you're not?
I'm not a carpenter. I'm not a plumber. I mean, there's plenty that I'm not, but I've dabbled in many different areas. But I think it all comes down into creative expression in various forms.
Great. I just skipped over the welcome, but welcome. We're happy to have you.
Thanks for having me on, by the way.
Yeah. Yeah, you're speaking about all the, creative expression and things like that. There's a new poetry book that you have that came out, which was from, I think you wrote it last year when you had COVID. How do you go from, I'm really sick right now, you know what I got to do? I got to write poetry. Like, how does that happen?
Well, that's a fair question. I guess I've had a history of writing poetry. So I have 2 other books out there, but anyway, I've been writing it since about age 16. So I'm 43 now. So I guess most of my adult life, that was the first thing I wrote. And so I always it's the kind of thing you put away for a while. You don't really come back to. But I think there's something about poetry because there's not really a market for it, like a big market for it. It's not going to be a bestseller. So there's something about poetry that I think, like, creatively is a little more pure. It's just kind of raw, can be anything. And so I've found, for whatever reason, a lot of the times when I'm in a more dark period, particularly with this book, I somehow turn to poetry more than other kinds of writing. I find it to be a little bit healing to process, especially when things are kind of awry. And March of 2020 in New York City, of course, it was like the first epicenter. Things were really wild. So it was helpful for me to write them. And then I was like, once I had the poems, I was like, maybe I could turn this into a book. And, half of it goes to charity and that kind of thing.
Oh, wow. Once you did turn it into a book, is it already the same publisher from your previous books that you have done? Or do you have to go hunt down a publisher then? Especially because poetry, I don't know, you don't just knock on HarperCollins' door to get poetry published.
Yeah, exactly. No, technically, this one was actually a self-published book. Some of my others I had a publisher. I had a photographer friend of mine do the photos and another friend do the illustrations. So I had to contact them and then just sort of put it together. But that's sort of the process.
That's actually interesting. That you added the photos in to complement it, or you thought that it would say more beyond the words, or just like, let's get nice photos for this?
Well, the photographer, I had been thinking over time that it might be interesting to collaborate with him. I'd written 2 other poetry books without images. And I just thought, maybe using imagery would be something different. And so I didn't want the images to just represent what the poems were saying. I wanted to sort of complement them, maybe be a little askew. That whole Emily Dickinson thing, tell the truth, but tell it slam. But like maybe with the images too, being a little awry or complimenting or commenting on it. So there actually was some time spent in terms of figuring out what image for what poem and how the layout should be and all that. But yeah, the interesting thing about the book, I think in this case, was that it was sort of an accurate account of what I was feeling at the time. It's that time capsule thing.
Right.
I usually edit stuff a lot more, but with this book, I sort of wanted it to be, what was that mindset that I was in at that time when both I was feeling really horrible and everything was so crazy. No one knew what was going to happen,
Yeah. Well, when you look back at that, is it more of a, oh yeah, I remember that. You look back at that and you're like, I can't believe I survived. How did I get through this?
There is a gratitude element, certainly. If I was going to go back and rework it, I probably would make it more upbeat than I did. But then I think it would probably lose whatever it was in that moment.
Right.
So there is a gratitude. There is, I'm in a much better place now. My life is better than at that time. There was other things going on too, so it was it was a weird time, I have to say. I was in kind of like an alternate state of reality. And some people say COVID can do that to you too, because you get really depressed and it can like mess with your thinking patterns a little bit.
Right.
So I think that played into it too. I don't know. It's hard to say.
Huh. And I just got to ask this: when you were writing poetry at 16, did you tell people that you were writing poetry at 16, or was that just kind of your own private thing?
Oh, well, I would fill up notebooks and, I would show them to some people. There was a kid in high school who also wrote poems, and he would post them once in a while in the cafeteria on the wall, and people would read them and think they were weird.
Right.
And I think I did that once too, and I think the janitor threw it out or something.
Oh.
I was discouraged, but
Yeah.
it was a lot for myself. But I would occasionally show them to people, or I remember I had a time where I dropped acid and I wrote all these books, and a friend found them at his house, and he didn't know what they were, cause
Oh man.
but he thought they were interesting. So it was more. I think it was more of a private thing, but I've always liked poetry. In fact, I would say that was the thing that got me into writing. But it just haven't always written it. But I've always sort of had an affinity for it.
Right. Do you read a lot of poetry also? Or you kind of mix up whatever you get a chance to actually read?
One thing I should do is read more contemporary poetry. I do read a decent amount of, like what would be called classic poetry,
Right.
like great poets like William Blake or Emily Dickinson, Wallace Stevens, stuff like that. Occasionally I will read modern poetry too. I like Bukowski, but or just people putting stuff out now, like through Twitter. I've met some people and some interesting things. But yeah, I do like reading poetry. I wouldn't say I read it on a daily basis or anything. I do dabble. I would definitely say I was influenced by like beat poetry, and I do have a cousin who was like a distant cousin, somewhat known, I should say, but who was, writes a lot of poetry, and I guess it's a little bit filial. I don't know.
So you think when you're writing, do you think you're trying to model after the quote unquote classic poetry, or I'm just going to write my thing, and however it comes out, that's what it's going to be?
Yeah, it's more I write my thing. I would say, if anything, I was modeled off more, like beat poetry, contemporary, free verse. I like it to be straightforward and direct. So I'm minimalist, but I do like imagery. So, of course, one of my first things when I was into poetry, this is vaguely embarrassing, but I used to have an adolescent obsession with Jim Morrison. Of course, I read all his poetry, and then I loved the music of the Doors, and I would be going deep dives into that, and I thought that was maybe an influence early on. Yeah, it's hard to say. I think it's like a primal thing for me. It's very unconscious. Of all the kinds of writing I do, I'd say it's the least planned. It's the most spontaneous.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of anything goes.
Overall, does that also mean that it kind of flows automatically, or are there times that you're sitting there like agonizing over one or two words and it's just, what do I write here?
No, flows 100%.
Oh, wow.
But the thing is that I then revise somewhat. Depends on the poem. With poetry, my process is different than other writing, whereas some poems I just won't publish, but I try to write the whole poem in the draft. Some poems are better than others, and later I'll go back and sometimes revise or cut parts out, or etc. But if it doesn't flow, I'll just scrap it, or I don't usually rewrite a whole poem unless I sometimes will take the idea and write another poem with that idea. But the basic way I wrote it in the beginning is somewhat close. In certain instances, there's decent amount. At least the essence of what I wrote, I try to get across in the final product.
Yeah, well, it's just so interesting because it's so different from writing a novel. With you're banging your head against 5 drafts, 10 drafts, 15 drafts to figure everything out. But
sure,
yeah,
sure. Well, with novel writing, which I've done some of as well, but I haven't published any novels, but I have a couple that I'm hoping to put out in the next couple of years. And the way I would say it's different is, well, I would be more the pantser kind of thing.
Yeah. Okay.
Rather
Yeah.
than the plotter. I still would say I'm by the inspiration more, but there's a lot more revision. I still write more. I think I read something Anthony Burgess is more like this. In general, there is exceptions. I try to write the book, and I do go back in other drafts, but this is like the general protocol is, at least when I'm in the polishing stage, when I'm going to a chapter, I try to complete that chapter. So like, it's not like I have 15 drafts. I just might have 15 versions of that chapter.
Oh,
Get
that's
what I mean?
interesting. Yeah.
Then I go on to the next chapter. See what I mean? So then, like, that's the chapter. But there are sometimes I go back and I change shape, but that's basically what I do.
See, that's an interesting way of working it, because sometimes everyone's just like, get all the words out and get it done. Don't look at anything you've done until then. But you're breaking it down into sections almost to do it like that.
It's not that as much different as people think, but yeah, I kind of agree with that philosophy that people are saying. Okay, so if you really want to break it down, what I would do is generally this seems to be what works best for me. Everyone's different. First draft, I agree. Just get it all down. I sometimes don't even write in order the chapters. Just write anything. Get it all down. I agree. I'm totally on board with that. But then I think starting in second draft is when I do the final thing I'm saying, which is, okay, this is chapter 1. And I don't do like 10 drafts. And I might do 5 drafts of chapter 1. Mm-hmm. Then that's done. Now I go to chapter 2. Could be 5 drafts of that, but then I go through the whole thing like that.
Yeah, I hear that. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay, this is kind of going back for a second, but I guess also we were saying that you don't really go back over your poems so much. If you're trying to capture a moment, that I guess that does have to be a little bit more spontaneous and not really something that you can just keep refining, because then you might ruin, I guess, the feeling of the moment that caused that. Does that make sense? Or did I just totally make that out?
Yes, that is a huge thing. And okay. I still have that issue, too, with other kinds of writing. That is always the balance. It's like you want to maintain that energy and whatever it was that propelled you to write it.
Yeah.
But you also want to, say it's a chapter in a novel or something or a story, sometimes pare it down or just cut out like excess or whatever it is that you're doing. So it's like a balance between the two. And I think just by experience you learn, but there's no real right answer for that.
Right. Well, like you said, everyone's got their own way of doing things.
Sure. Like I'm sure you have your own. What's your method of? I don't know if I'm supposed to ask you, but what's your method?
I'm also a little bit more of a pantser, but I usually wait until I know. First, I have to get my end, if I know where I'm going, and then I'll try to figure out where my starting point is, and then hopefully I'll get 1 or 2 big scenes in between, and then from there, I'll feel confident to sit down and let everything else kind of flow at that point. So sometimes I have to hold on to an idea until I'm sure that I've got almost like the framework or like the structure for it, and then I'll pants the rest of it.
Great. And I've heard a lot of writers do that same protocol as you, like John Irving, he has to have the end, and others. So I understand that. It's weird how everyone has a slightly different protocol. I'm not sure the reason. It's just whatever works for them, I guess.
Yeah. And you'll probably find good company wherever you end up. Yeah. So for this book of poetry, which is Notes from the Bonfire?
Yes.
Notes from the Bonfire. Now, when you self-published, was that anything first you looked into regular publishing and then you self-published because poetry is that's just the best way to do poetry? Or it wasn't necessarily a choice, or was a choice, or what's the deal with that?
Well, A, I wanted to put it out in a timely way because it was about coronavirus. And B, there isn't a huge market for poetry. The publisher I used for the humor book would have considered it. I did send it by him, but I just figured it would be easier to do it this way. It didn't seem like it needed the whole traditional publishing apparatus for a poetry book.
Yeah.
So it felt like this was the best way to just put it out. The main thing was just put it out there. And also publishing is changing, whether self-publishing is better or traditional publishing. And, it depends on the project, I think.
Yes, absolutely. Even big name authors sometimes will go with the self-publishing if they just feel like it's right for whatever they're working on. Is the humor book Do Not Feed the Clown? Is it Do Not Feed the Clown?
Yes.
So for the humor book, do you intentionally set out to write, I'm going to write humor, or I'm just going to be writing this book now and we'll see what it turns out? Because I think for a lot of people, humor is hard. You think because, if I have a conversation with someone and that might be funny, they're so funny, they could do humor, but that's not true. You have to really know how to either on stage get it over to the audience or writing it how to get over to the audience. So you set out to do a humor book, or that's kind of what it turned into?
No, again, that was more of what it's turned into. I published some of them in these other humor outlets, and then I had some of them already, and then I figured I'll write more about other contemporary topics. That's when I started thinking I could put these together into a book.
Mm-hmm.
And so then I did start setting out and writing more of them. But basically what it was there were certain things about a lot of contemporary topics that I maybe touched upon in stand-up, but I couldn't explore in more detail or, more subtlety, what I thought was more subtlety. So then I started writing these little parodies or satires or various things. And eventually I had enough that I thought I could try to publish them as a book. You look at it, it's 34 pieces, but they're on all different topics and different subjects and different styles. There's really nothing linking them except that it's my voice or that they're all satirical in some sense. I just thought that would be another avenue. I do stand up, so that was another avenue to express myself. When I was putting it into a book, there was some more revision for the book. A lot of them were things that I'd written before, but there were some new ones that I put in just because I knew I was writing a book. So it was kind of like a combination.
So some of the material had sort of been tested almost.
I guess so, yeah. I mean, just a few of them I published or sent around, and a decent number of them were new. So it was a combination. Another thing is with me, I try to keep things different each time.
Yeah.
I try to write in different styles or different modes, and I find when I'm writing in a different mode or even a different genre or whatever it is, the writing itself becomes a little bit different. And the voice changes. I don't know why. Maybe that's just me. So that's interesting to me creatively. I know that's totally what you're not supposed to do from a marketing point of view. And publishers hate that from a traditional point of view. Yeah. But I'm looking at it from just a pure creative thing. And I find that interesting.
Well, I guess it kind of makes sense because there are authors. I'm sure someone who reads my work will say, oh, I see your voice throughout it all. But I also try to, I want to write something else than what I already did. So a small change maybe, but yeah, that's interesting. Okay, this is a totally random question, but I am curious. When people know that you're a comedian or that you do write, do you feel like sometimes they have to either tell you a joke or oh, I have such a great idea for a story? Do you get that a lot?
They tell me a joke sometimes. Yeah, they definitely. I've had shows, people come up to me, or my parents do that. My father's son, you're writing this down, thing that I cannot possibly use because it's weird. It's just some weird family dynamic. But he's always you do get those things. Yeah, that does happen sometimes.
Because you get it. If someone knows that you write books or something, they're like, oh, I always had a great idea for a story.
Right. But there was one time where a family member had an idea based on something that a friend had experienced. And I actually wrote that into a script. I can't get into it all, but this Indian producer was looking like they were going to create it, and it kind of has been falling through the cracks. But it's an interesting script, and I can't really describe it because I don't know if it's still being shopped around some places. But anyway, it was basically the genesis of it was actually something that a relative had a friend who experienced. I took it in my own way, but that was the core idea of it. So I guess once in a while you do end up using something.
Yeah. Because you do kind of gather from your experiences and then just kind of turn it into something else. But it has to be based somewhere almost. That's funny. It ended up like that.
Yes. Well, one thing for ideas, I tend to have too many ideas to cover.
Yeah.
But it's just either conversation, it could be podcasts, it could be reading books. Sometimes there's a scientific concept or just something a futuristic thing. And that a lot of times is a trigger for what I think is interesting to explore. So I have some ideas like that I have written down that I think would make good books, but if I ever get to them, I still have other ones I haven't completed.
Like a notebook that you keep them down in, or just an open file on a computer somewhere?
Have a file. I do also have index cards from back in the day with probably 100 ideas in just a box, and then I have just a page written down with just brief notes on all these ideas. And I have notes on my phone with other ideas. I have way too many ideas to ever even come close to finishing 1/50th of them. But that is one of the difficult things, picking and choosing. Because the way I spend a lot of time on something, once I pick something, that could be something that could take me a long time to finish. So I have to really like the idea.
Yeah. Well, is there any way to really know before you dive too much into idea, or it's just, well, I hope this is the one that I'll love even after I'm done with it?
I think you can get a sense of how much there is there for you. At least for me, I can.
Right.
I can get a sense of oh, this is going to be good. And then the bigger question is for me, though, I have these things that are partially complete from the past, and I go back and forth to how much time I should spend doing those or just scrap those and just do the new thing. The new thing has more energy, but these other things are partially complete, and in a way you you don't want to like abandon them. They're like your kids.
Yeah.
you don't want to let die. I don't know. So I'd say that's a bigger issue for me.
That's so true, because you do try not to start something if you don't think you're going to finish it. But then once you put so much time into something, you're like, well, how can I not finish it? But if you don't have the energy, like, that energy, creative energy around it, you're like, well, I don't know if I'm ever going to finish it. That's such a good point.
Yeah,
There's just no
and then sometimes
solution.
you end up going back. So like right now, I'm working on this novel that I started so many years ago, and I wrote a draft of it. It was never could get a publisher, but I started in the creative writing class. I mean, there's a long genesis with this thing, and then I spent a long time on this thing. And then I wrote so many different versions of it. But I think I wasn't clear, over the years I've gained some skill in terms of like how to finish things and how to. So I started working on it again, but it's essentially there's a version that's done, but it needs work to get better, I think. So anyway, that thing has been around for like 10 to 15 years. So it's a crazy process. And now maybe this time I think, hopefully I will finally complete this thing. But this thing is like an albatross.
Do you still think it's a good story? Or you're like, well, I may as well just finish the thing.
I do think, I think it has potential.
Yeah.
The one thing is that I debate is some of the newer things may be better. And you're like, is this up to the par?
Oh.
It's that kind of thing. It's like, it has some elements that are good, but I'm somewhat hamstrung by the design and like, you can only change it so much, put it that way,
Yeah, that's true. Also, you only have the energy to change it so much sometimes also. Yeah. Well, especially if you have so many other ideas waiting for you. You're like, either cooperate, cooperate, or I'm leaving you.
Yeah. It is that kind of love-hate relationship. I don't know if it sounds like you have that too with your ideas, and I look at it like kids. It's like, I want to take care of all the children, and they're all like children, even the ones that are sort of neglected.
Yeah.
And that have some flaws. You still want to like them to be the best they can.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. It's such a good way of thinking of it, but I don't know if I want to think of it like that, because I don't feel doubly guilty if I don't, really see something through. But just as a side thing, just as an interesting thing, someone like you who has so many like different facets of your career, do you have to get different agents for like each part of your career? Or do you have like one agent or manager or somebody who could cover, hey, I wrote a novel, okay, I'll take care of that for you? Or do you have to find somebody else now to take care of that part for you?
I need to find that because I found the humor publisher without an agent. So I do have an agent for acting, but I don't have one for writing.
Writing yet.
So, poetry, you can I've been used indie publishers or self-published, and with the humor book. So, yeah, I still need to find an agent for like the novels and things. Oh. But, it's different. Each thing you need your own agent.
Well, it's nice to know you're in the boat with the rest of us writers who have to figure out the whole agency thing. So, just ask quickly, because I'm sort of watching the time here, but I wanted to. This might not be a short answer or a long answer, I don't know, but just again, also from the different aspects, you have so many different aspects of storytelling, between writing poetry and a humor book and being an actor, director, and comedian, all the different things that you do. Do you see that there's any part of it big overlap, or certain things are just so different, especially if you're an actor acting on somebody else's script? Or do you see that it's really just a lot of things you just have to figure out? It's just method is different, or like the output method is different? And do you have any comments to say on that?
Well, one thing that transfers over to all the things that, because my predominant orientation is I would say is comedy. I know, I do the poetry. That can sort of translate to like a film. So my short film was comedic. The humor book, the fiction I'm doing, the two novels, they're comedic. So I would say if there's one thing, hopefully your comedy can translate it. It's different in different modes, but hopefully that can apply to anywhere. And in terms of being different, acting is different than writing for sure. But there's a bit of a cross-fertilization thing that can go on. I think with any kind of creativity, sometimes for fun I just do sketches or drawings. I don't think I'm great at that, but I think any kind of creative act can influence and infiltrate the other and can have some benefit. Maybe not as much as just diligently applying that one craft, but it has some usefulness, I think. I would say that. But it is different though. But I mean, acting for sure is different. The one thing I could say is similar is if you're reading other scripts and you're performing them, you do in a way kind of learn story from that a little bit, or it kind of becomes a little ingrained. So that maybe translates a little bit into your writing, possibly.
Right. How much when you get the script is it like this is what the writer wants the character to be versus like I got the part, so this is mine now? Or it depends how A-list of an actor you are.
Yeah, it depends on what kind of project, because I'm definitely not A-list, but in any case, like usually you have to audition.
Yeah.
So usually they know they like your interpretation of it. Always there's an interpretation, so it can always be taken in a different way. So if you got the part, which is the hardest part usually with acting, you're really halfway there because they've already seen a version of it. Depending on the project, it can, develop and grow as you go over it. And another thing I would say that's interesting about acting that I find similar to writing is as you keep doing it, like, for example, you do a scene, you do like 20 takes of it, right? Different angles, you do close-up, you do the master shot, you do, over the shoulder, you do whatever. You're doing this multiple times. And in doing that so many times, going over it, it gets refined, maybe it gets a little honed, maybe you get a better flow, maybe becomes a little more natural. And I think writing can be like that too. You read it over, you refine it, and it keeps changing and morphing and gets more fluid, it gets this. So there is a lot of like overlap like that.
That's actually a really interesting parallel. That's a good point. Because your first draft is almost never, well, I guess maybe besides for the poetry, your first draft is almost never the one that you want anybody to be reading. I spaghetti flung the words. Like, are they even sentences there?
Yeah, exactly. But you could chisel that out and create something. I'm always fascinated by the writing process and how different writers have such different ways of going about it.
Yeah. All right, totally random. Have you ever had anyone approach you and know you only from poetry and not from any of the like 100 other things that you do?
I could say no to that.
Yeah.
Honestly, the most things I've been contacted about is reality shows I did. I was on a couple of so that is what I'm getting contacted about. If it's something you most commonly know, or the acting. But no, I would not from poetry. Also, some things don't even have your picture on it. So
yeah, it's true.
That would be great though. If
that was. That'd be like a real like, hey, I love your poetry. What? Very, very good. Not because I want to, but because times, we don't want to overdo this. But I always end off with asking this fill in the blank question and it could be an off the cuff kind of answer, like, what your soapbox has been all the years or whatever, whatever you want to put in there. But some sort of fill in the blank using any of the nouns of, I love it when writers, actors, directors, stories, publishers do X, and I really don't like it when they do X. So how would you fill in the blank for both of those?
I love when writers defy genre expectations and when they create something that is unexpected but still in some way has a traditional bedrock to it. And I hate it when that's hard to try to think which thing to say.
Oh, this is too many? Oh, no.
I guess I could say I hate poetry that seems so formal that it loses the life behind it, and it's more about structure rather than content.
Oh, very good. Okay, just quick follow-up on the first part. I love it when writers defy genre. Does that include like genre mashups or like crossovers, like a Cowboys and Aliens sort of thing? Or it could, but not necessarily?
It could. It doesn't have to be that broad. I just meant that the thing that bothers me with some books, and it's the same with movies, is that a lot of times I find them to be, not all of them, obviously there's some great work all the time. I'm just saying there's a certain percentage of them that are very formulaic.
Oh, yeah.
And I know that's encouraged by the industry, but it's just
cookie
not
cutter.
As interesting to me.
Yeah, I hear that. When you sit down and you're like, oh, I know exactly where this is going. And then it does go there.
Right. Like, I love stuff where it's backwards. Okay, to take a film, like Kubrick's probably my favorite director, like Full Metal Jacket. And one of the reasons I love that film is that, like, the first third, the climax is at the end of the first third, really. And it plays with structure in all these ways where it's very unexpected.
Yeah.
And it kind of goes against, like, it's not just like this 3-act thing with the rising tension and everything's resolved at the end, all is lost moment. I think personally, like, I know a lot of writers love Blake Snyder Save the Cat.
Yeah.
I despise that book. And I don't like the advice because it's too pat to me.
Okay.
I love stuff that goes against that.
Yeah.
And, I don't want to have my character save a cat early on so he's identifiable with the audience, because I just find that to be cheap and pandering and not like what a real person is like.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yes. Very, very good. Well, Matt, thank you so much for your time and for being on. It's been so much fun speaking with you.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it, and I had a blast. Glad we got to chat about some of these concepts, and I hope I didn't say anything disparaging that any of your listeners won't like. That's just personal opinion, and I love the arts. I love all kinds of creative types, so I want to put that as a caveat, and I'm always being surprised. So that's just my general orientation.
Yeah, art unfortunately is very subjective.
Yes.
It's what benefits us and also what we suffer from when when we're not appreciated. Yeah. This was a bonus episode of Oh My Word Podcast featuring Matt Nagin. To find out more about Matt and all the different stuff he's up to, check out the link in the episode notes. To find out more about Oh My Word Podcast, please follow us on Instagram at Oh My Word Podcast. Check us out at eltenenbaum.com. Thanks so much for joining us. Catch you next time.